Picture this. You're sailing through the peaceful waters of the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly, your radio crackles to life with a desperate distress call. All officers, including captain, are dead lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. This isn't the plot of a horror movie. This is the real story of the SS Ourang Medan, a ship that became one of the most terrifying maritime mysteries of all time. Welcome to a tale that will make you question everything you think you know about the sea. Subscribe to this channel and give a like if you would like to listen more mystery stories like this one. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the story of the ghost ship, a vessel where an entire crew was found dead with expressions of pure horror frozen on their faces, their eyes wide open, staring at something so terrifying that it literally scared them to death. And just when rescuers thought they had answers, the ship exploded in a ball of flames, taking all evidence to the bottom of the ocean. But was this really a supernatural event, or something far more sinister? Stick around, because what I'm about to tell you will leave you questioning whether some mysteries are better left unsolved. But first, let me paint you a picture of the world in 1947. World War II had just ended, leaving the globe in a state of rebuilding and uncertainty. The seas were busy with merchant vessels carrying goods between continents. It was during this time that the SS Ourang Medan was supposedly making its final voyage. Now, here's where things get interesting from the very beginning. The name Ourang Medan itself is mysterious. In Malay, Ourang means man and Medan refers to the Indonesian city. So essentially, we're talking about the man from Medan. But here's the first red flag. There's no official record of this ship in any maritime registry from that time period. No shipping company has ever claimed ownership of the vessel. No port authority has any record of it docking anywhere. It's as if the SS Ourang Medan was a ghost long before it became one. Yet the story persists, and for good reason. Because what allegedly happened next is so disturbing, so utterly terrifying, that it's been retold for over 7 decades. The story begins on a calm day in February 1947. Multiple ships in the Strait of Malacca picked up the same distress signal. The message was transmitted in Morse code, crackling through the radio waves with an urgency that made seasoned sailors' blood run cold. SOS from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including Captain dead, lying in chart room and bridge. The radio operator receiving this message must have felt his heart skip a beat, but the transmission wasn't over. Probably whole of crew dead. I die. And then nothing but static. Imagine being the person who received that message. The sheer terror in those final words. I die. Who was this person? The last survivor desperately trying to warn the world before succumbing to whatever had killed his crewmates? 2 ships responded to the distress call that day. The American merchant vessel Silver Star was the first to locate the Ourang Medan. When they found her, she was drifting aimlessly in the calm waters. No signs of distress on the exterior, no visible damage. She looked like any other cargo ship going about its business, but appearances, as we all know, can be deceiving. The Silver Star's captain made the decision to board the vessel. A rescue party was assembled, and they approached the mysterious ship. What they found when they climbed aboard would haunt them for the rest of their lives, and I want you to really picture this scene as I describe it. The boarding party climbed over the railings of the Ourang Medan. The first thing they noticed was the complete and utter silence. No sounds of machinery, no voices, no movement whatsoever. It was as if they had boarded a ship frozen in time. They made their way across the deck, calling out to see if anyone was alive. Their voices echoed eerily in the stillness. And then they saw the first body, a crew member lying on the deck, his face contorted in absolute terror. His eyes were wide open, staring at something that wasn't there. His mouth was agape, as if he had been screaming when death took him. But this was just the beginning. As they explored further, they found more bodies. Every single crew member was dead, and every single one had the same expression of pure, unadulterated horror. They found bodies in the wheelhouse, in the crew quarters, scattered throughout the ship like victims of some invisible killer. Some were found pointing at empty air, as if they had seen something so terrifying that they couldn't look away even in death. Others had their arms raised defensively, as if trying to ward off an attack from something only they could see. The rescue party found the captain slumped over his charts in the bridge. His face bore the same expression of horror as his crew. But here's what made it even more disturbing. There were no signs of violence, no wounds, no blood. Whatever had killed these men had done so without leaving a mark. It was as if they had literally been scared to death. The boarding party searched the entire ship, hoping to find at least one survivor. In the radio room, they found the radio operator. His hand was still reaching for the telegraph key. This was presumably the man who had sent the final message. "I die." Even the ship's dog was found dead, its lips pulled back in a snarl, as if it had been facing off against some unseen threat. Now, you might be wondering about the temperature on the ship. This detail is crucial to the story. Despite being in the tropical waters of the Strait of Malacca, where temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the rescue party reported that the ship felt unnaturally cold. Not just cool, but freezing cold. Their breath was visible in the air as they explored the vessel. It was as if the ship existed in its own pocket of winter. Some accounts even mention that frost was forming on the metal surfaces, despite the blazing tropical sun beating down on the deck above. The rescue party decided they needed to get the ship to port for a proper investigation. They attached a tow line to the Ourang Medan and began the slow journey toward the nearest harbor. But the mystery was far from over. In fact, it was about to take an even more dramatic turn. As they were towing the ship, smoke began to pour from the cargo hold. At first, it was just wisps, barely noticeable. But within minutes, thick black smoke was billowing out of every opening in the ship. The Silver Star's crew quickly cut the tow line and moved to a safe distance. They watched in amazement as the entire ship was engulfed in flames. And then, in a moment that defied all explanation, the SS Ourang Medan exploded. The explosion was so violent that debris rained down into the ocean for several minutes afterward. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. The ship had completely disappeared beneath the waves, taking with it any evidence of what had really happened to its unfortunate crew. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking the same thing I thought when I first heard this story. This sounds too incredible to be true. And you know what? You might be right. But before we dismiss it entirely, let's examine the various theories that have been proposed over the years. Because even if the story isn't completely accurate, the fact that it has persisted for so long suggests there might be some truth to it. The first and most obvious theory is that this was a supernatural event, that something otherworldly boarded the ship and killed the crew. Believers in this theory point to the expressions of terror on the victims' faces and the inexplicable cold temperature throughout the ship. They argue that only a supernatural force could have killed an entire crew without leaving any physical evidence. Some have suggested that the ship encountered malevolent spirits or demons while crossing through cursed waters. Others believe it was the work of extraterrestrial beings who were conducting some kind of experiment. The sudden explosion of the ship is explained as an attempt to cover up evidence of otherworldly intervention. But let's be honest here. While these theories make for compelling horror stories, they don't hold up to scientific scrutiny. So what are the more rational explanations? The most widely accepted theory among researchers involves chemical poisoning. Some experts believe that the Ourang Medan was carrying a cargo of dangerous chemicals, possibly potassium cyanide or carbon monoxide, which could have leaked and poisoned the entire crew. This would explain the lack of physical wounds and the expressions of terror on their faces. Chemical poisoning can cause muscle spasms and contortions that might appear as expressions of horror. The cold temperature could be explained by the ship's refrigeration system malfunctioning due to the chemical leak and the explosion. Well, many toxic chemicals are also highly flammable. A small spark could have ignited the remaining chemicals in the cargo hold. This theory gains some credibility when we consider the time period. In 1947, safety regulations for transporting dangerous materials were far less strict. Ships regularly carried hazardous cargo without proper containment or safety measures. But there's an even more intriguing theory, one that involves international espionage and government cover-ups. Some researchers believe that the SS Ourang Medan was involved in transporting chemical weapons. Remember, this was just after World War II. when various nations were experimenting with biological and chemical warfare. According to this theory, the ship was carrying Japanese chemical weapons that were being secretly transported. When something went wrong and the chemicals leaked, they killed the entire crew in a matter of minutes. The explosion wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate destruction of evidence. Government agents may have remotely detonated the ship to prevent the chemical weapons from falling into the wrong hands. This would also explain why there are no official records of the SS Ourang Medan. If it was involved in top-secret operations, all documentation would have been classified or destroyed. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Let's examine the evidence, or rather, the lack thereof. Despite this story being told and retold countless times, there's surprisingly little concrete evidence to support it. No official maritime records mention the SS Ourang Medan. No insurance claims were ever filed for the vessel. No crew manifests exist. No port authority records. No shipping company has ever claimed ownership. The Silver Star, which allegedly rescued the crew and witnessed the explosion, does appear in maritime records. But there's no mention in its official logs of encountering the ghost ship. This raises a crucial question. If the story isn't true, where did it come from? The earliest known published account of the SS Ourang Medan appeared in 1952 in a Dutch-Indonesian newspaper. But even this account was presented as a second-hand story, with the author admitting he couldn't verify the details. From there, the story spread through maritime circles and eventually into popular culture. Each retelling added new details, making the story more dramatic and frightening. Some versions include details about the crew's bodies being arranged in ritualistic patterns. Others mention strange symbols carved into the ship's hull or mysterious cargo containers filled with unknown substances. It's a classic example of how urban legends evolve over time, with each storyteller embellishing the tale to make it more compelling. But here's what's fascinating. Even if the story is entirely fictional, it might have been inspired by real events that occurred during that time period. The 1940s were full of mysterious ship disappearances and unexplained maritime incidents. The aftermath of World War II left the oceans littered with unexploded ordnance and dangerous chemicals. Several documented cases exist of ships encountering toxic gases or dangerous materials. In 1947, the same year as the alleged Ourang Medan incident, there were multiple reports of ships finding mysterious debris. Some of these discoveries involved chemical contamination that killed or sickened crew members. It's entirely possible that the Ourang Medan story is a composite of several real incidents, combined and embellished over time to create one compelling narrative. Let's also consider the psychological aspects of this story. Why has it captured the imagination of so many people? The ocean has always been a source of mystery and fear for humans. It represents the unknown, the vast emptiness that could hide anything. Ships disappearing without a trace, crews found dead under mysterious circumstances. These are fears that tap into our most primal anxieties. The SS Ourang Medan story combines several terrifying elements: isolation, mass death, and the supernatural. It's the perfect ghost story, designed to send chills down the spine of anyone who hears it. But let's dig deeper into some of the specific details that make this story so compelling. The expressions of terror on the victims' faces is a detail that appears in almost every version of the story. From a medical perspective, what could cause an entire crew to die with such expressions? Certain types of poisoning can indeed cause muscle spasms that might be interpreted as expressions of fear. Strychnine poisoning, for example, causes severe muscle contractions that can contort the face into a grimace. Cyanide poisoning can cause the victim's face to turn blue and their features to become distorted. Carbon monoxide poisoning, on the other hand, often leaves victims looking peaceful, almost as if they're sleeping. So the chemical poisoning theory doesn't perfectly explain the terrified expressions described in the story. This discrepancy has led some researchers to suggest that the story was embellished to make it more frightening. The cold temperature is another intriguing detail. In the tropical heat of the Strait of Malacca, how could an entire ship become freezing cold? Some chemical reactions are endothermic, meaning they absorb heat. If the ship was carrying certain chemicals and they began reacting, it could theoretically lower the temperature throughout the vessel. Alternatively, if the ship's refrigeration system malfunctioned and began pumping cold air throughout the vessel, It could create the unnaturally cold conditions described by the boarding party. But again, we're left with more questions than answers. Without physical evidence, we can only speculate. Now let's examine some of the attempts that have been made to verify this story. Over the years, several researchers and journalists have tried to find concrete evidence of the SS Ourang Medan. They've searched through maritime archives, contacted shipping companies, and interviewed elderly sailors. One of the most thorough investigations was conducted by maritime historian Roy Bainton. He spent years searching for any trace of the vessel in official records from around the world. His conclusion? The SS Ourang Medan, as described in the legend, never existed. But Bainton didn't dismiss the story entirely. He suggested that it might be based on a real incident that was heavily fictionalized over time. Perhaps a ship did encounter mysterious circumstances, but the details were exaggerated to create a more compelling narrative. Another researcher, Elliot Cowley, focused on the Silver Star, the ship that allegedly discovered the Ourang Medan. He was able to track down the vessel's official logs from 1947 and 1948. While the logs confirm that the Silver Star was operating in Southeast Asian waters during that time period, there's no mention of encountering a ghost ship or witnessing an explosion. This is particularly damning evidence against the story, because maritime logs are legally required documents. Any significant incident, especially one involving the discovery of a ship full of dead bodies, would have been meticulously recorded. The absence of such records is telling. However, some believers in the story argue that the logs might have been altered or classified. If the incident involved secret government operations or chemical weapons, as some theories suggest, then it's possible that all official records were deliberately suppressed. This argument is difficult to disprove because, by definition, classified information isn't available to researchers. It's the perfect unfalsifiable claim. No evidence exists because the evidence was destroyed. But let's consider another angle. What if the SS Ourang Medan story is actually a form of Cold War propaganda? The 1940s and 1950s were a time of intense international tension. Nations were constantly trying to intimidate their enemies, with stories of secret weapons and mysterious capabilities. Some researchers have suggested that the Ourang Medan story was deliberately created and spread to make foreign powers believe that certain nations possessed devastating chemical weapons. The message would be clear: cross us, and your ships might end up like the Ourang Medan. This theory would explain why the story emerged when it did, and why it spread so quickly through maritime communities around the world. It would also explain the lack of official records. Propaganda, by its very nature, doesn't need to be based on fact. Now, let's explore some of the variations of the Ourang Medan story that have emerged over the years. Because, like all good legends, this one has evolved and changed with each telling. In some versions, the rescue party finds evidence of a violent struggle aboard the ship. Furniture is overturned, walls are scratched, as if the crew fought desperately against some unseen attacker. Other versions include details about strange sounds coming from the ship's hold. Moaning, scratching, or whispering that couldn't be explained by normal ship operations. Some tellings mention that the ship's compasses were spinning wildly, pointing in all directions. Others describe electronic equipment malfunctioning whenever rescue workers came too close. One particularly dramatic version claims that several members of the rescue party became violently ill after boarding the ship, vomiting and collapsing as if they too were being poisoned. These variations serve to make the story more frightening, but they also make it less credible. When a story has too many versions, each contradicting the others in significant ways, it usually indicates that the tale has grown in the telling. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Ourang Medan mystery isn't whether the story is true or false. It's what the story reveals about our relationship with the ocean and the unknown. The sea has always been humanity's greatest mystery. We've explored less than 5% of our oceans. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the depths of our own planet. This vast unknown has always been fertile ground for stories of mystery and terror. From ancient tales of sea monsters to modern accounts of ghost ships, the ocean continues to capture our imagination in ways that no other environment can match. The SS Ourang Medan taps into these primal fears. The idea of being alone on a vast ocean, far from help when something goes terribly wrong, is a nightmare scenario that resonates with all of us. But let's examine some real maritime mysteries that might have inspired the Ourang Medan legend. Because the truth is, the oceans are full of genuinely unexplained incidents and disappearances. Take the case of the MV Joyita, for example. In 1955, this merchant vessel disappeared while sailing between Samoa and the Tokelau Islands with 25 passengers and crew aboard. 5 weeks later, the ship was found partially submerged, listing heavily to one side. But here's the mysterious part. All the passengers and crew had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of violence, no distress signals, no lifeboats missing, no bodies found. The ship's logbook, cargo, and lifeboats were all still aboard, but the people had simply disappeared. To this day, no one knows what happened to the 25 souls aboard the MV Joyita. Or consider the case of the SS Waratah, dubbed Australia's Titanic. In 1909, this passenger steamship departed Durban, South Africa, with 201 passengers and crew. It was bound for Cape Town, a journey that should have taken just a few days. The ship never arrived. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of the Waratah was ever found. Not a single piece of debris, not one life preserver. Over a century later, the fate of the SS Waratah remains one of maritime history's greatest mysteries. These real cases show us that the ocean is indeed capable of swallowing ships and their crews without leaving any trace. Perhaps the Ourang Medan story is our attempt to put a face on these inexplicable disappearances, to create a narrative that makes sense of the senseless. Now, let's talk about the role that popular culture has played in keeping the Ourang Medan legend alive. The story has been featured in countless books, documentaries, podcasts, and YouTube videos. Each retelling adds new layers to the mystery, new theories about what might have happened. Some modern versions of the story incorporate elements from contemporary conspiracy theories. UFO enthusiasts have suggested that the ship was attacked by extraterrestrial beings. Paranormal investigators claim it was the work of malevolent spirits or demons. Government conspiracy theorists believe the incident was a failed experiment in mind control or biological warfare that was covered up by international intelligence agencies. The internet age has given new life to these theories, allowing believers to share evidence and build communities around their interpretations of the story. But it's also allowed skeptics to more easily share their research and debunk many of the more outlandish claims. One interesting development in recent years has been the use of advanced technology. To search for evidence of the Ourang Medan, some researchers have used satellite imagery and underwater mapping technology to search the seabed in the Strait of Malacca. Their hope is to find the wreckage of the ship, which would finally prove that the story has some basis in fact. So far, these searches have turned up nothing, but that doesn't necessarily disprove the story. The ocean is vast, and finding a single shipwreck without knowing its exact location is incredibly difficult. Even with modern technology, many known shipwrecks remain unfound. Let's also consider the psychological phenomenon known as the collective memory. Sometimes, communities develop shared memories of events that never actually happened. These false memories can be incredibly detailed and convincing, passed down through generations as if they were fact. The maritime community is particularly susceptible to this phenomenon. Sailors have always been storytellers, and the isolated nature of life at sea makes it easy for stories to become distorted over time. A small incident might be embellished each time it's retold in port. Eventually, the story takes on a life of its own, becoming accepted as truth even though it never happened. This could explain how the Ourang Medan legend developed. A minor incident involving a ship in distress might have been gradually transformed into the terrifying tale we know today. But here's what I find most fascinating about the Ourang Medan mystery. Even if it's completely fictional, it still serves an important purpose. It reminds us that the world still holds mysteries, that there are still things we don't understand. In an age where we can Google almost any question and get an instant answer, stories like the Ourang Medan preserve a sense of wonder and uncertainty. They remind us that not everything can be easily explained or categorized. Now let's examine some of the scientific explanations that have been proposed for the alleged phenomena. One theory involves methane hydrates, also known as fire ice. These are crystalline structures found on the ocean floor that contain large amounts of methane gas. When disturbed, they can release massive amounts of gas into the water and atmosphere. Some researchers have suggested that the Ourang Medan might have encountered a sudden release of methane gas from the ocean floor. This could explain several aspects of the story. Methane is lighter than air, so it would rise and potentially displace oxygen on the ship. This could cause the crew to suffocate without showing any obvious signs of injury. Methane is also highly flammable, which could explain the sudden explosion. And interestingly, when methane hydrates decompose, they absorb heat from their surroundings. This endothermic reaction could theoretically create the cold conditions described on the ship. However, this theory has its problems. Methane releases from the ocean floor are relatively rare and usually occur in specific geological conditions that don't match the location described in the story. Another scientific theory involves infrasound, which are sound waves below the range of human hearing. These low-frequency sounds can be produced by various natural phenomena, including underwater earthquakes, volcanic activity, or even severe weather conditions. Studies have shown that exposure to certain frequencies of infrasound can cause feelings of unease, panic, and even hallucinations in humans. Some researchers believe that intense infrasound could theoretically cause death through disruption of internal organs. This might explain why the crew appeared terrified and why they died without obvious injuries. But again, this theory is largely speculative. While infrasound can certainly affect human behavior, there's no documented case of it causing mass fatalities like those described in the Ourang Medan story. Let's also consider the possibility that multiple factors combined to create the incident. Perhaps the ship was carrying dangerous chemicals that leaked and poisoned the crew. The chemicals might have also interfered with the ship's electrical systems, creating the unusual conditions reported by the rescue party. When the Silver Star attempted to tow the vessel, the movement might have caused a spark that ignited the remaining chemicals, leading to the dramatic explosion. This scenario combines elements of several different theories and might provide a more complete explanation for the alleged events. But we must always return to the fundamental question: did any of this actually happen? The lack of documentation is the biggest obstacle to accepting the story as fact. In 1947, maritime communication was well established. Ships maintained regular radio contact with port authorities and other vessels. A distress call like the one allegedly sent by the Ourang Medan would have been received by multiple stations and officially recorded. The fact that no such records exist is strong evidence against the story's authenticity. Additionally, the discovery of a ship full of dead bodies would have triggered an international incident. Maritime law requires that such discoveries be reported to the appropriate authorities. Insurance companies would have been involved, governments would have conducted investigations. The complete absence of any official response suggests that the incident never occurred. However, some believers argue that this absence of evidence is itself evidence of a massive cover-up. They suggest that powerful interests had reasons to suppress all information about the Ourang Medan. If the ship was involved in transporting illegal weapons or conducting secret experiments, then those responsible might have gone to great lengths to erase all traces. This conspiracy theory is difficult to disprove, but it requires us to believe that multiple governments, shipping companies, and maritime organizations all participated in an elaborate cover-up that lasted over 75 years. While such conspiracies are theoretically possible, they become less likely as they grow in scope and duration. Let's take a step back and consider what we can learn from the Ourang Medan mystery, regardless of whether it actually happened. First, it demonstrates the power of storytelling. To capture and hold human attention, a good mystery can persist for decades, even without solid evidence to support it. Second, it shows how our fear of the unknown continues to influence us in the modern age. Despite all our technological advances, we're still drawn to stories of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Third, it highlights the importance of critical thinking and evidence-based analysis. In an era of fake news and misinformation, the Ourang Medan story serves as a reminder that we should always question the sources of the information we consume. Now let's explore some similar maritime mysteries that do have documented evidence. These cases might help us understand why stories like the Ourang Medan resonate so strongly. The Mary Celeste is perhaps the most famous of all ghost ship stories. In 1872, this merchant brigantine was found drifting unmanned between Spain and Portugal. The ship was seaworthy. Her cargo was intact, but the crew had vanished without a trace. Unlike the Ourang Medan, the Mary Celeste is thoroughly documented in official records. Court proceedings were held, investigations were conducted, and theories were proposed. Yet even today, over 150 years later, no one knows for certain what happened to her crew. The difference between the Mary Celeste and the Ourang Medan is crucial. One is a documented historical mystery, the other appears to be a modern legend. But both tap into the same fundamental fears about the ocean and its dangers. Another well-documented case is that of the MV Salem. In 1980, this cargo ship was found abandoned, off the coast of Senegal with no crew aboard and no explanation for their disappearance. The ship showed no signs of distress. The engines were still running, and meals were still warm on the table. It was as if the crew had simply vanished into thin air. Despite extensive investigations, the fate of the Salem's crew remains unknown. These real cases show us that the ocean is indeed capable of creating genuine mysteries. Ships do disappear, crews do vanish, and sometimes we never learn why. Perhaps the Ourang Medan story persists because it represents our attempt to make sense of these real mysteries by creating a narrative that provides answers, even if those answers involve the supernatural or the impossible. Let's also consider the role that cultural differences play in how this story is perceived. In Western cultures, we tend to approach mysteries with a scientific, analytical mindset. We look for logical explanations and demand physical evidence. But in many Southeast Asian cultures where the Ourang Medan allegedly occurred, there's a greater acceptance of supernatural explanations. Stories of ghost ships and cursed vessels are part of the maritime folklore of Indonesia, Malaysia, and other regional nations. This cultural context might explain why the story has been so readily accepted by some communities while being dismissed by others. It's neither right nor wrong to believe in supernatural explanations. Different cultures have different ways of understanding the world around them. The Ourang Medan story serves different purposes for different audiences. For some, it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond our control. For others, it's a thrilling mystery that adds excitement to an otherwise mundane world. And for still others, it's an opportunity to exercise critical thinking skills and explore the difference between fact and fiction. Now let's examine what modern maritime safety experts think about the Ourang Medan story. Most agree that if such an incident occurred today, it would be almost impossible to cover up. Modern ships are equipped with GPS tracking, satellite communication systems, and automatic identification systems that make their movements easy to monitor. But in 1947, ships were much more isolated. Radio communication was the primary means of contacting the outside world, and not all vessels had reliable radio equipment. It was theoretically possible for a ship to encounter trouble and disappear without anyone knowing exactly what happened. This makes the story more plausible from a technological standpoint, even if the supernatural elements strain credibility. Maritime safety experts also point out that the 1940s were a dangerous time for shipping. World War II had left the oceans littered with unexploded mines and ordnance. Chemical weapons and other dangerous materials were being transported with minimal safety precautions. Pirates and hostile forces were active in many shipping lanes. It's entirely possible that ships encountered dangers that we can barely imagine today. This historical context lends some credibility to the idea that something unusual might have happened to a vessel in those dangerous waters. But let's return to the question of evidence one more time. In recent years, some researchers have claimed to have found new evidence supporting the Ourang Medan story. They point to newspaper clippings, maritime insurance records, and eyewitness accounts that supposedly corroborate aspects of the legend. However, when these sources are examined closely, they often turn out to be secondary sources. that reference the same unreliable original accounts. It's a classic case of circular citation, where multiple sources appear to confirm a story but are actually all based on the same flawed information. This is a common problem in historical research, especially when dealing with sensational stories that capture the public imagination. Newspapers might report on a story without verifying the facts, and later historians might cite those newspaper reports as if they were independent confirmation of the events. So where does this leave us in our quest to understand the truth about the SS Ourang Medan? After examining all the evidence, theories, and investigations, we're left with more questions than answers. The most likely explanation is that the story is a modern maritime legend, with no basis in historical fact. But it's a legend that serves important purposes in our collective consciousness. It reminds us that the world still holds mysteries, that not everything can be easily explained, and that the ocean remains one of our planet's most dangerous and unpredictable environments. Whether the SS Ourang Medan ever existed or not, the story continues to fascinate us because it taps into fundamental human fears and desires. Our fear of the unknown, our desire for mystery and adventure, and our need to find meaning in seemingly random events. In many ways, the truth about the Ourang Medan is less important than what the story represents. It's a reminder that even in our hyper-connected, heavily monitored modern world, there are still places where anything could happen and no one would know. The vast emptiness of the ocean continues to capture our imagination in ways that no other environment can match. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, not because we can't find the answers, but because the questions themselves are more valuable than any solution. The SS Ourang Medan, whether real or imaginary, serves as a modern ghost story that keeps alive our sense of wonder about the world around us. And in an age where mystery is becoming increasingly rare, perhaps that's the most valuable thing the story can offer us. Before we conclude our investigation, let's take one final look at the lasting impact of the Ourang Medan mystery on popular culture and maritime folklore. The story has inspired countless works of fiction, from novels and short stories to movies and television shows. It's become a template for maritime horror, a shorthand way of evoking the terror of the unknown sea. Modern ghost ship stories often borrow elements from the Ourang Medan legend. The mysterious distress call, the crew found dead with expressions of terror, the sudden, inexplicable destruction of all evidence. These elements have become part of our cultural vocabulary for describing encounters with the supernatural at sea. But the story's influence extends beyond fiction. It's also shaped how we think about maritime safety and the risks of transporting dangerous materials by sea. Even though the story may be fictional, it serves as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of inadequate safety protocols and insufficient emergency planning. Maritime training programs sometimes use the Ourang Medan story as a case study, not because they believe it actually happened, but because it illustrates important principles about crisis communication, emergency response, and crew safety. The story also highlights the importance of maintaining accurate records and proper documentation of all maritime activities. If the Ourang Medan had existed and proper records had been kept, we would have a much clearer picture of what actually happened. The mystery exists partly because of the absence of documentation, which serves as a reminder of why accurate record-keeping is so crucial in maritime operations. Now let's consider what the future might hold for mysteries like the Ourang Medan. As technology continues to advance, it becomes increasingly difficult for ships to simply disappear without a trace. Satellite tracking, automated distress beacons, and global communication networks mean that maritime authorities can monitor vessel movements in real time around the world. This technological surveillance makes it unlikely that a modern Ourang Medan could occur without leaving extensive documentation. But this increased monitoring comes with its own implications. As mysteries become rarer, they may become more precious. Stories like the Ourang Medan might represent one of the last links to a time when the world still held genuine unknowns, when it was possible for an entire ship to vanish without explanation. In this sense, the story serves as a kind of cultural artifact, preserving our connection to a more mysterious past. It's also worth noting that the ocean itself remains largely unexplored and unpredictable. Despite all our technological advances, we've mapped less than 20% of the ocean floor in detail. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deepest parts. Our imagination and our fear. Even if stories like the Ourang Medan are fictional, they remind us that the ocean still holds secrets that we may never fully understand. New species are discovered regularly. In the deep ocean, some of them so bizarre and alien that they seem to belong in a science fiction movie. Underwater volcanic vents create environments so extreme and unusual of our own planet's oceans. This vast unknown continues to fuel that they challenge our understanding of what life on Earth can be. These real discoveries remind us that the ocean is still capable of surprising us, still capable of revealing phenomena that we never imagined possible. So while the SS Ourang Medan may not have been real, the sense of mystery and wonder that it represents certainly is. As we wrap up our investigation into this maritime mystery, let's reflect on what we've learned and what questions remain. We've explored multiple theories about what might have happened to the SS Ourang Medan, from supernatural explanations to chemical poisoning from government cover-ups to natural phenomena. We've examined the evidence, or lack thereof, and considered the cultural and psychological factors that keep this story alive. What emerges from this investigation is not a clear answer about what happened to a specific ship in 1947, but rather a deeper understanding of why we need stories like this. The Ourang Medan legend serves multiple functions in our society. It entertains us with its horror and mystery. It challenges us to think critically about the information we receive. It reminds us that the world still holds unknowns. And it connects us to our primal fears about the dangers of the sea. Whether you choose to believe that the SS Ourang Medan was real, or dismiss it as a modern myth, the story has value. It's a reminder that in our rush to explain and categorize everything, we shouldn't lose our capacity for wonder and mystery. The ocean remains one of the few places on our planet where the impossible still seems possible, where stories like the Ourang Medan can capture our imagination and hold it for decades. As we continue to explore and map our oceans, as we develop better technology for tracking and monitoring ships, stories like the Ourang Medan may become increasingly rare, but they will also become more precious, serving as reminders of a time when the world still held genuine mysteries when it was possible for an entire ship and crew to simply vanish into the vast emptiness of the ocean. So the next time you hear a story that seems too incredible to be true, remember the SS Ourang Medan. Ask yourself not just whether the story is factual, but what purposes it serves, what fears it addresses, and what it reveals about our relationship with the unknown. Sometimes the most important truths are found not in what actually happened, but in why we need to believe that it might have happened. The ghost ship SS Ourang Medan, whether real or imaginary, continues to sail through the waters of our collective imagination, reminding us that some mysteries are worth preserving, and that the ocean will always be our greatest source of wonder, terror, and the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of maritime history's greatest mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember that the most terrifying monsters might not be the ones we can see, but the ones that exist only in the darkness of our own imagination. The SS Ourang Medan may be gone, but its legend will continue to haunt the seas forever.